All right, so we are diving into something pretty buzzworthy today, I think.
Definitely buzzing.
Yeah, Percival Everett's James. Have you heard of this one?
I have. Yeah, it's been like everywhere, hasn't it?
It really has. It's like a reimagining of Adventures of Huckleberry Finn.
Uh,
But, and here's the twist, it's told from Jim's perspective.
wow.
Yeah, Jim, the enslaved man who escapes with Huck.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's taking that classic story, but flipping the script, basically.
Exactly. And get this, this book, it's already kind of blowing up. It's like snagged a spot on the National Book Award long list, the Booker Prize long list.
Oh, wow.
It's a New York Times bestseller. And get this, Steven Spielberg's even eyeing it for a film.
Wow, that's impressive. It sounds like it's really struck a nerve.
For sure. And I think it's that whole flipping the script thing, right? Like we've got Huckleberry Finn, a classic, yeah, but also one that's been critiqued a lot, especially for how it deals with race.
Yeah, you can't really ignore that aspect of it.
Exactly. And that's
Yeah.
what makes James so fascinating. It's not shying away from those tough conversations. Choosing Huckleberry Finn for this kind of reimagining, it's like a direct engagement with those uncomfortable truths, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's like he's deliberately stepping into a minefield, and I'm really curious to see how he navigates it.
Right. It's not just a retelling. The ebook description, it really emphasizes how James actually illuminates Jim's like agency, intelligence, and compassion. And those aren't things usually associated with how enslaved people were portrayed back then.
Right, right. Usually they're relegated to the sidelines.
Exactly. But Everett's putting Jim front and center. He's the driving force, experiencing those familiar events from Huckleberry Finn, but totally on his own terms.
And that's huge because it forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about the original story. We're not just observing Jim from a distance anymore. We're walking in his shoes, understanding his motivations, escaping that threat of being separated from his family, and all on such a personal level.
It really makes it real. And it connects with Huck's own escape from his abusive father. But Jim's story, it just adds this whole other layer of depth and complexity to the narrative.
Definitely. It makes it so much richer. And it raises the stakes, too, because you're dealing with so much more than just a boy running away from home. You're talking about freedom, family, survival.
It's like Everett is giving a voice to the voiceless,
Yeah.
reclaiming the narrative, you know, offering a corrective to history in a way. And here's what really gets me. The description mentions Everett's electrifying humor and lacerating observations. And I was like, wait a minute.
I can see why you posit that.
Right, because we're talking about slavery, escape, really, really heavy themes. To think of those being explored with humor, that really piqued my interest.
It's a bold move for sure. Everett's known as like a literary icon, and part of that is his ability to tackle tough subjects with both sensitivity and this really sharp wit.
So you think that's what we're seeing in James, that same kind of approach?
I think it's a safe bet. He's not afraid to challenge conventions and spark conversations, and using humor in a book like this, well, it could be a way to do both.
Hmm, how so? I'm curious about that. How would humor work in a story like James?
Well, imagine a scene where Jim uses his wit to like outsmart someone who underestimates him because of his race.
Oh, I see, I see.
It's humor as resistance, right? It highlights the absurdity of the prejudice he's facing, but also creates this moment of shared understanding with the reader. You're laughing at the absurdity of the situation, but you're also recognizing the very real injustice of it.
That's a really good point. It's disarming in a way, like you're drawn in by the humor, but then you're left with this deeper message, this thing to chew on.
Exactly. It's thought-provoking and powerful.
It really is. And it makes me even more eager to dive into James and see how Everett pulls it off.
Me too. But before we get totally lost in the specifics of this book, let's take a step back and think about the bigger picture here.
Okay, yeah, good idea.
Why should you, the listener, care about this? Why does James, this reimagining, why does it matter? And not just in the literary world, but like in 2024, what makes this relevant now?
It's interesting, right? Like, we keep coming back to this idea of like James being relevant today,
Hmm.
and you've got me thinking about that. Why even more now?
It's a question worth sitting with for sure.
Yeah, and we talked about Everett's style, how he uses humor and social commentary, but like, how does that translate into something meaningful, for us, for readers in 2024?
That's the heart of it, isn't it? And I think James really exemplifies why it's so important to revisit the classics, but through a lens that resonates with us today, like
Mhm.
with a contemporary perspective. It's not about pretending the originals don't exist or trying to replace them.
Right, right.
It's more like, how can we have a conversation with them, you know? See them with fresh eyes and allow those perspectives to challenge what we thought we knew.
So it's about more than just understanding, like, Jim's story and James.
Yeah.
It's about understanding how his story, how the way Everett tells it, how that changes the whole picture.
Exactly. It's like Huckleberry Finn, it's taught a lot, but often with like disclaimers, explanations about the language, the historical context, and for good reason.
Yeah, it's definitely of its time.
Exactly. But James, it seems like it's not shying away from any of that.
Uh-uh.
If anything, it's leaning into those complexities.
Yeah.
Because by making Jim the central figure, it's like Everett's forcing us to confront those uncomfortable parts head on. We're not just observers anymore. We're right there with Jim, seeing the world as he sees it.
And by doing that, by putting ourselves in his shoes, we start to understand more than just the text itself. It becomes about race, about representation, about all these issues we're still grappling with. It's like almost like Everett's holding up a mirror to history and asking us to really see it, to acknowledge the things that were left unsaid, the voices that were silenced.
That's such a powerful way to put it. And it makes you think about how those untold stories, how they shape not just our understanding of the past, but also who we are today, right?
Absolutely. And you know what really struck me? You mentioned untold stories. And it made me think about how this reimagining James, it might actually help us understand Huckleberry Finn even better than we did before.
How interesting. How so?
Well, because now Jim has his own agency.
Right.
He has a voice. And in giving him that voice, Everett's challenging us to really think about our own interpretations of the original.
I see what you mean. It's like we're suddenly seeing both sides of the story.
Exactly.
We're getting a fuller picture of what happened and, more importantly, how those events affected everyone involved. And that's where the real magic happens, I think. When we allow ourselves to be okay with those multiple perspectives, to really sit with the discomfort of these complex issues, that's how we grow. That's how we gain a deeper understanding.
Yeah, and it's like we often approach those classic books with this, oh yeah, I know that story kind of attitude. But James is like, hold on a second. There's always more to discover,
Yeah.
especially when you're willing to see things from a different angle.
That's what makes this so much more than just some literary experiment.
Right.
It's about recognizing that books, stories, they aren't static. They don't just exist in a vacuum. They evolve with us, they change because of us, and they're for us, always moving forward.
And sometimes those new interpretations, those reinterpretations, they can be even more powerful than the original, don't you think? Like they shed light on things we might have missed the first time around.
It's like you're standing on the shoulders of giants, right?
Yeah.
You're getting this whole new perspective. And with James, that new perspective could be really groundbreaking. It's not just about one story. It's about re-examining an entire genre, even like a whole era of American literature through a lens that's more inclusive, more critical of what's come before.
I like that. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
So as we kind of wrap up our deep dive here, I want to leave you with this thought, okay?
Yeah.
We've talked about how James sort of challenges the legacy of Huckleberry Finn, right?
Yeah.
But what about the challenge it might pose to us as readers?
Yeah.
Like knowing that Huckleberry Finn is often read with, like, those warnings about its language and how race is portrayed.
Right.
How do you think James might add to that, or maybe even complicate our understanding of the original? Because it's almost like Everett saying, hey, look at these two stories together.
And that's what I love about a book like this. It doesn't try to spoon feed you the answers. It makes you think, It invites you into this space where you can ask questions, you can be critical, you can have those nuanced conversations, and you might feel a little uncomfortable, but you sit with it and you come to your own conclusions.
Maybe that's where the real value lies.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
In that process, grappling with these questions.
Maybe it is. Because it's in that act of engaging, of thinking critically, maybe even playfully about these complex issues, that's how we start to build a more empathetic, more inclusive understanding of, everything. Our shared history, our literature, everything. It reminds us that these conversations, they're never really over. And there's always something new to learn, something else to discover out there.
Well said. Well said. So there you have it, folks, our deep dive on Percival Everett's James. We've talked about the premise, the context, the potential impact of this book.
We hope you'll check it out, form your own opinions.
Yeah, happy reading, everyone.